Changeworking, moving minds for change that lasts.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Changeworking, a show for practitioners and coaches who help their clients create change. My name is Ruckus, and as always, I'll be in conversation with James Tripp. Today, we're exploring psychoactive facilitation, the deeper states of engagement that arise when clients are experiencing shifts and changes live in the moment during the session. We talk about what it actually means to go psychoactive, how to recognize it when it's occurring, and why judgment and certainty can get in the way of it happening in the first place. Along the way, we touch on daydreaming, dynamic metaphors, and what it means to orient your client towards possibility, not just answers. So here's our conversation on psychoactive facilitation.
Okay, so there's a term, psychoactive facilitation, that I use sometimes. There was this idea when I was learning the original growth processes from Norman Vorton. He used to teach this sort of 4-quadrant model that David Grove would teach. So quadrant 1 was the sort of conversational zone. And if I'm remembering this rightly, because I don't have any notes from this, it's a long time ago, quadrant 2 was the psychoactive zone. And quadrant 3, I can't remember the title, but was to do with when things start to get really out in terms of spatial organization, right? And quadrant 4 was like to do with ancestry and stuff like this. So it was like starting to get shamanic and that kind of thing at this point. So basically, what Grove would point out is in a natural conversation, you will be in an intellectual space. Let's say you'd be talking about things. You're not really attending to what's going on inside of your experience. So your words are not exquisitely attached to that experience. As soon as somebody shifts into quadrant 2, they are now connected with a richer embodied experience. And their words are much more intimately connected with that. So it's this realm of being in the body and really connected to what's unfolding through the body, and in much more kind of imaginative and felt sense space to overlap it with the Gendlin thing. So he would talk about going psychoactive in a conversation. You can be conversational, and then you can go psychoactive. And then again, quadrant 3 is when it goes beyond the body and we start getting into how things are organized around us. We're unconsciously organizing things spatially around us. And then I don't know anything about quadrant 4. I never did any of the work that was in quadrant 4. But my guess is it's just to do with having this sense of time across generation and what you can do with that. And that is probably a hugely psychoactive component, actually, in a lot of ways. Once we've gone psychoactive, things have come alive, whether it's in the body or beyond the body. Things have come alive in a way that's different from if we're just in a sort of intellectual discussion, conceptual sort of way of engaging. Now, by this framework, you could argue that all hypnotic process work or neurolinguistic process work is psychoactive. If it's not psychoactive, nothing's happening. What are we doing? And that's true whether it's an old school kind of Ericksonian trance where somebody's really there kind of connected into their experience of being profoundly released or relaxed. Maybe ideas are just floating through, so it's not like a tight facilitation. But we are in an altered state and things are going on. And if I say psychoactive facilitation, I'm talking about the same as I'm talking about if I talk about co-creative trance work or interactive trance work or whatever. The one last thing I'll say on that, I don't think David Grove used the term psychoactive facilitation. I don't think he used that term. I could be wrong, but I don't think he did. I think he just talked about things going psychoactive and us wanting to bring the exchange out of the realm of the conceptual, out of the realm of the intellectual, into this kind of more connected psychoactive way of engaging.
The term itself, I've heard you use that term before, going psychoactive, and it does bring to mind I can just imagine a distinct stage when you with a client, and if you said they've gone psychoactive now, something's changed, something's different in the way the client's processing.
Yeah. And you know what? It's probably an interesting exercise to put a bit more attention and energy on that and go, well, what actually is specifically different? Because I'll say going psychoactive, and I kind of know, but if I had to list out in the left hemisphere way, what are the features of going psychoactive? I don't really have a list. So I've never done this before, but it might be worth doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think one feature is that people become more absorbed in the detail and the experience connected to the detail. So there's an idea from Lisa Feldman Barrett. She is a neuropsychologist, neuroscientist. She wrote a book called How Emotions Are Made. And I really like this book. It's quite chunky. I believe it would be better titled How Experience is Made. So how emotions are made. Now, what she points out, the whole book is really about how we conceptualize the world and how our conceptualizations alter our biochemistry, literally in the moment. So every shift in concept and conceptualization, and by the way, ongoing thought is a continual cascade of changing conceptualizations, usually, grounded around a certain theme or whatever. But that each shift in conceptualization transforms how our body, our proto-mind, let's say, allocates resources, internal resources, which could be oxygen, which could be we need more of this neurotransmitter here, how our second messenger cascades go off. So basically conceptualization is fundamentally a body activity, as a biochemical activity, as well as a psychological activity. The term she uses is body budgeting. She says when we reconceptualize slightly, our body budgeting is allocated differently, right? That the resources, the energy is deployed to different systems according to the sense we make in the moment. So literally sense changes biochemistry, which, coming back to the people that accuse neurolinguistic programming of being pseudo-scientific, that's the point that it's getting at. Neurolinguistic. It's talking about language and neurology, or you could say really concepts and biochemistry, if you want. So NLP is kind of in this ballpark early on, but this is now validated, at least by the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett. Now, this was really interesting to me because I have an interest in this psychoactive thing and also Eugene Gendlin's idea of felt sense. Now, when we feel, this is, and again, to sort of quote another neuroscientist whose name has temporarily escaped me, but I'm always quoting. I'll come back to it in a moment. It'll come back to me if I carry on talking about it. So we utilize our interoceptive systems in our thinking and our thought process. Now, what our interoceptive systems do is a part of the nervous system, the interoceptive nervous system, that gives us information about what's going on in our body organs. In our stomach, in our heart, in our intestines, in our liver. Information comes back to the central nervous system through the interoceptive system. Now, most of the time, this information is not inside of conscious awareness. It's in the realm of the unconscious mind. But there's certain things in our language that suggest that people have always been plugged into this to some degree or another. People say, I had a gut instinct. My heart just wasn't in it. I had a hunch that, these kind of physical terms that seem to sit in the realm of the cognitive. And somebody's like, I got a kind of odd feeling about this. This doesn't feel right. What is it that we're feeling when something doesn't feel right, or it feels this way or that? Or what we're feeling is our felt sense, which is a product of our interoceptive systems being utilized by our cognitive systems. Right? So felt sense is something that was interesting to me. And when I read Lisa Feldman Barrett's book, it suddenly made sense. We are getting information about the physiological status of our body all the time into our central processing unit, if we just keep this in the realm of a scientific kind of framework. We're getting this information coming in. It's outside of consciousness mostly. But if you take this idea that the conscious mind isn't a separate mind. Consciousness is a quality. It's a way we shine attention and awareness. So if we can bring attention awareness and become more aware, which might be just like, oh, have you noticed that? Like often when you're working with a client and you say, so what is it you're experiencing right now within yourself as you're thinking this, as you say this? They go, oh, I feel a tightness here. That was there before, but they weren't noticing it. Right? It's not like it wasn't there. It was there. They just weren't attending to that channel. So I think one of the qualities of going psychoactive is that people are suddenly connected to more of what's going on in their ongoing processing. Right? Instead of that ongoing processing going on, and they've got thoughts that are sort of skimming across the surface and seem to be detached from that, but still sort of about that. Those thoughts, the ongoing obvious thoughts and the ongoing obvious communication become more in touch with the full body processing that's going on anyway. Right? So like oftentimes when I'm working with a client, you see the shifts happen. Boom. Now, you see them as the practitioner when you tune in and recognize that physiology changes, right? As processing changes, physiology changes. You don't know how it's changed, but you know that it's changed as you're watching as the practitioner. So you get to witness it at a higher level. You get to increase your acuity for the changes that are happening with the client. But on the flip side of that, it's extremely useful to enhance the client's own acuity for their internal changes and shifts and unfolding, and to start seeing that as relevant information. Because one of the big barriers to people working psychoactively is they think that this stuff that comes up isn't relevant. It's just like, often when I first start working, someone will go, oh, no, I know this seems weird, but, right? And what they mean is there's something coming through, but I want to dismiss it. My normal thinking process would dismiss it or ignore it. And they kind of sheepishly will mention some quality or something that's come through that normally they would think is silly or foolish or irrelevant or not important or whatever. But when people drop those judgments about what's going on in their full body system, when I say full body system, there's the interoceptive stuff, there's the felt sense shifts and qualities, but also like a metaphor could come up, which we could touch and go on, or a metaphor could come up that we could go deeply into, and it really literally comes alive like some kind of virtual reality, and it has richness and meaning inside of it that we can work with. So people go psychoactive when they let go of these judgments about what's coming through and start to just work with what's coming through, basically. And you see it because it's a much fuller level of engagement. I've talked about this elsewhere about different intelligence systems in the body, right? And what I'm just saying is this: when we're in a cognitive flow, there's a lot going on, but we don't pay attention to most of it. And working with different intelligence systems is just honoring more of what wants to come through, instead of going, well, that's not important. That's just a metaphor. It's just a turn of phrase or something like that. It's like, no, well, let's let this come alive and see what it creates for us and what we can create with it. So to me, that's what going psychoactive is. And I think really when people engage in different flows of mind and allow themselves to go fully and richly into them, that is also fundamentally hypnotic. And I think is what's going on in good old-fashioned hypnotic trances. It's just that what they're engaging with then is being offered by the hypnotist. And isn't so much necessarily coming up through from the quote-unquote unconscious mind or deeper parts of the client or whatever. The other thing I'll say about this is old school hypnosis talks about some branches of hypnosis are very interested in conscious-unconscious communication. And they'll often come up with things like finger signals and using this weird sort of abstract, very, very separated, almost dry computer-like language. Ask that part if it has a positive intention around, and it can let us know through that moving one of the fingers on that hand. And it's just like, it's kind of weird, isn't it? You want to talk to a rich, multi-dimensional intelligence, but you do it in a dry, clipped, conceptual way and limit the line of communication to something very specific in, the unconscious mind, if you like, or that which is outside of consciousness is available to us in a variety of different ways, and we can participate in it much more richly. And to me, that's often a way more valuable thing to do than just set up some abstract finger signal, although other times and places that could be something that's of incredible value with a given client.
I was thinking about this. I believe this ties into psychoactivity, psychoactive facilitation. Is this idea of your inner world, and when I take it back to parts when I see parts, and when you do a transformation physically in your inner world and you see parts change, to me that's psychoactivity.
Yeah.
Or memory reconsolidation when you're using some modalities to change the way a memory is stored. Is that psychoactivity? Is that psychoactive?
Yeah. Here's another way of thinking about it. This is a good question.
Okay.
In a way, you could say that the psychoactivity is like a dynamic dreaming, let's say.
Yes. Oh, that registers. Yeah, that really hit me.
Yeah. So it's, or another way to use a different metaphor again. So like a regular dream, it just kind of does what it does. It just goes where it goes. There's no agency involved in directing it in any particular way.
Right.
I actually used to use this as a frame years and years ago when I was a hypnotherapist. I used to say to clients, do you ever daydream? And they go, oh, not so much these days, but when I was younger, I would. I said, we all have the capacity to daydream, but what most people don't know is that daydreaming is profoundly powerful. It's profoundly powerful for making changes, for learning, for weaving new connections together. But we tend to disconnect from the power of it. And normally when we do it, we're not really directing it with any intention. I see. So people wonder what hypnosis is. They can expect to be in trance or not hear things or be out of control. It's not really like that at all. It's much more like a dynamic daydreaming, where we're making conscious, intentional choices about what we discover and how we connect it together. So I would set this up, and it was part of how I would frame doing my hypnotic work. So I think this is a useful frame. Another frame that you could say is, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, about virtual reality and augmented reality.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, reality is what's out there in the world, but we never experience it like it is. We actually experience an augmented reality. We're overlaying our psychological stuff, our sense-making, whatever, but the overlay creates a coherent experience of reality, which is not reality as it is. It's reality as our mind is shaping it.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine the augmented reality layer. Imagine we bring that right out and separate it from reality so it becomes a virtual reality, and actual reality drops into the background. Now, somebody is in a virtual reality of the layer of what would normally be augmenting reality, right? So they've got their Oculus or Meta Quest goggles on.
Right.
And now they're in this layer that's normally kind of just meshed with and augmenting their reality, but they're in it in a way they can explore very deeply and make different connections in. So what tends to happen with psychoactive facilitation is the world around sort of disappears more, and we go into this, but we recognize the separation, and we are free to maneuver within that layer. Now, I will say this. In everyday life, people do this all the time anyway. They just don't know they're doing it.
Right.
Right. So what they get is they get pulled into a layer of virtual reality. So let's say somebody that suddenly thinks, oh, did I leave the iron on? And now, oh my goodness, I left the iron on. It's going to burn. I've got to go. And now everything that's front and center, they're now in a virtual reality, which is all about the iron and whether it's on or off, for example. And everything that's going on around them disappears. It's just gone. It hasn't gone completely. It's kind of there, but they're not really living in reality. They're living in have I left the iron on?
Right.
And maybe it plagues them and they go home and they can't think of anything else, and they're all tight and tense and all of this, and they get home and they open the door and they go, oh, the iron was off. They weren't feeling anything in reality. They were just 100% in this mind-made thing and had by it entirely. So they're kind of in a trance. Right, but there's no dynamism in that trance. There's no choice in that trance. There's no new discovery in that trance. It's just this kind of automated thing. When we're doing psychoactive work, we're getting people into a trance, but it's one where we have more choice available. We have more exploratory options available. where we are sort of in it, but slightly apart from the material as well. And therefore we can kind of reweave things and put things together in different ways and experience different shifts. But yeah, we're doing that kind of stuff all the time. Just we don't normally realize it. And we're not creating something new often with it. We're often repeating some sort of pattern in the sort of everyday trances that we go into.
Especially things you're upset about. You're making them worse every time you're...
Right.
I want to get your viewpoint on what you see as the edges of psychoactivity or going psychoactive and change, and can change happen without some amount of going psychoactive?
So can change happen without some amount of going psychoactive? I think maybe not. But there's a caveat to that.
Okay.
I don't think that necessarily means that all change comes from some deep psychoactive process.
Mm-hmm.
In everyday terminology, we talk about epiphanies, or more commonly, aha moments.
Mm-hmm.
Those, people talk about a blinding flash if they've got like a visual metaphor. I suddenly realized the scales fell away from my eyes.
Right.
Sometimes you get a lot of these visual metaphors involved. And, in the course of life, these can happen for a variety of different reasons, But a sudden mind shift is usually accompanied by something happening in the experience. Right? People don't have these mind shifts, these sudden realizations, without there being some, maybe a shift in how they're experiencing things. Sometimes even the colors might change around people and these sorts of things. I've had these people report these experiences. I've had it myself. So sometimes a shift in the visual, sometimes a shift in the kinesthetic. But usually in that moment, there's something noticeable happen.
Right.
And sometimes it can be profound. I don't know. I suppose you hear stories of people going, I just woke up one morning and I decided I didn't want to drink anymore. And you go, well, when did that happen? I suspect that their mind had been touching on little moments of reflection. But mostly people that they go, I just decided I didn't want to drink anymore. But they had these little moments of reflection. And those moments of reflection were psychoactive moments, right? Or maybe something happened in the world that confounded somebody's prediction about what was going to happen in the world. Prediction errors are very powerful for affecting change, for influencing change, right? So, but I think there's always a kind of psychoactive moment, usually somewhere in the mix, most of the time.
I'm thinking about the moments when I heard something, a reframe or just something like that, where I just suddenly had a moment, and I can mime it right now. I immediately look up and my eyes start doing this, and I feel like I'm reorganizing something. And I was like, that is a moment. I'm just realizing now that is a moment of me going psychoactive for a moment.
Yeah.
I'm curious, are there clues when a client is going psychoactive, quote unquote? What are you looking for? Or what?
Yeah, right. So listen to me speak right now when I've been speaking throughout this podcast. People know like what I'm speaking like. I'm speaking quite quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Feelings don't move that fast.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody's speaking very, very quickly, one thing that you could be pretty sure of is they're not really in touch with their felt sense system.
Mm.
They're just, their thoughts and their words are bouncing across the surface. This doesn't mean that what's going on in their mind is irrelevant. I'd like to think that what I've been sharing in this conversation so far is some useful material inside of it, even though, I'm not reflecting, I'm not in the business right now of reweaving my reality. I'm in the business of sharing some ideas. So it's all right for me to be in that more cognitive conceptual channel and just kind of rattle along with it. But if I'm working with a client and they're just in that cognitive conceptual channel, so they're going, well, this did, and they're going through, and all they're doing is giving me an exposition of their existing reality.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're not really connecting into anything that's under the surface. so to speak. They're just skimming across the surface.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one clue. Now, it doesn't mean their body's not involved. It's just they're not going deep. They're going across. They're skimming across the surface of everything. So you'll hear it with more quick speech. You'll hear it with bouncing from topic to topic. A lot of touch and go, right? Just touch on this, then move on to the next, touch, move on to the next. And it might be, like sometimes, but not always, if somebody's up in a visual space a lot, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Here's one way of putting it. What we want is fresh, new thinking. We don't want the old thinking. We want the new thinking. Now, if somebody's rattling on too fast and they're just you're pretty much guaranteed you're getting the same old kind of typical sorts of thinking, because they're running typical thought loops in typical ways in typical intelligence systems. So one of the first things to do is often to slow people down. Right? This is a significant thing. It's just slowing people down, just getting them, if their attention is up, their eyes are up, it's flicking around, it's scanning some mental space up there. I'm not saying they oughtn't do that, but you want to get them a little bit more connected to what's in the body. So often for me, I'll gesture down into the body and say, what is it that you're noticing right now inside of this moment? Or I might just say, so as you're saying that right now, so go back to that thing that you just said right there. Just say that again, but this time just kind of notice the quality of it. Notice how it feels, right? I might say, imagine if it had an energy to it. What kind of energy would that be? And as I do that, I'm dropping my own intention into my own body. I might be gesturing towards their body as I kind of drop down in my own energy, drop down into the body. That's like a pacing and leading. Right. And then they might give me some information from the interoceptive system. I kind of feel like sort of tight across my chest. Right. So notice this tight across your chest. And just notice the words again and the tight across your chest. So now I've just moved them from a kind of intellectual, cerebral, conceptual, rational space. Something they just said that they would touch and go on. They would skim through. But my mind is like, I think there's something interesting to be found here. So I'll slow them down, I'll bring them back to it, and I'll focus in on that particular piece. Now, once I've focused in on that piece, and they are now in the realm of acknowledging it has a quality to it. It wasn't just a piece of cognition or rattling through. It actually has a quality to it, and they're noticing the quality. As soon as we're in that realm, boom, we're in the realm of the psychoactive. So that's a simple maneuver I'll use a lot. I'll just take a bit that's rattling through, and I'll have the client slow down, bring more attention to it, be stiller with it, feel into it more, connect into it more. And if metaphorical elements start to pop, encourage people to go into those and really work with those. Sometimes when you're doing metaphor work, somebody might say, it's like, I was working with a client yesterday who had a certain kind of feeling in their body, and then the metaphor of a koala bear came up for some reason, right? This is kind of common. People go, I don't know if this, it might seem silly, but a koala bear came to mind. Now, so often when people start out, they're like, I don't even know if I dare mention the thing.
Right.
Because it seems so superfluous and not related to anything.
Right.
So in this instance, it was a koala bear that showed up. Now, to them, they're like, is this just some random brain activity that has nothing to do with it? I'm like, no, everything's something.
Right.
If koala bears come up, there's something about the koala bear. So if you start to get details about the koala bear and they go deeply into the sort of theater of the imagination, what color, what kind of fur does it have? Right. It might turn out that the koala bear, this isn't true for this client. And if this client is listening to this, please do feel free to filter all of this out. Let's say, and this isn't what happened, I'd have said, and, what kind of fur does this koala bear have? And it might have been, actually, it's wet.
Mm-hmm.
Now a wet koala bear is going to mean something different to them than a dry koala bear. Maybe it, so often when you go in and you follow these details, right, and it's wet, and notice that the fur is wet, And is there anything else about fur that is wet on a koala bear like this? And things come up and you get these realizations, these shifts, stuff changes. No, I don't know what it means, but this is communication with the unconscious mind. It's using this idea again of utilizing different intelligence systems that normally would be skimmed over. They just wouldn't be a part of the processing flow. So oftentimes, if you have an intention, we want change and we want a positive change. We don't necessarily 100% know what that looks like, and it isn't always necessary. Sometimes it's unhelpful to be too grabby about what the change needs to be. But we know the client wants a better quality of experience and very possibly a change in external behavior. We know this. So we have a direction of travel, and we're looking to get change happening that leads to a clearer experience of empowerment, of choices and options. And we want to make sure this is deep, this change. So if somebody's too eager to change, this is another problem you get in change work, is people who are they're like, and they start to build some fantasy change without ever actually reprocessing the existing material at all. That was just pushed to one side. Some new fantasy is put in and they like, I must have this now. That's no good either. But it's just, again, like if you can bring people into, I sometimes call it, taking them into the matrix of the issues, of the trances. It's just slowing people down, bringing them into the body, allowing them to be curious about what the details are, what wants to come through when we slow down and create more space for more stuff to come through. This is all valuable. And I'm not saying you can't have change happen fast, because you can if you work with a lot of pattern interrupts and stuff like that. You can do a lot to shift people's state in a kind of more fire way. But if you want to do this psychoactive facilitation, you need perhaps more water, more slowing down, more getting deep into. You want at least as much earth and water and maybe air as you do fire.
So you're saying one of the things that can help lead towards psychoactive facilitation is letting go of judgment so they can bring whatever comes up. Is that correct?
I think letting go of judgments and becoming open to what comes through, being oriented towards possibility instead of certainty is helpful. And the reason I say that is because if someone's in a place of certainty and they need certainty too quickly, this is when they start going, that's important, that's not important. Or they're too early on trying to sort what's important and what's not, so they can decide what to dismiss and what to go with. So that's sort of sitting in the realm of prejudice, basically prejudice against certain things, the categories of things that want to come through. So yeah, unhooking from that and allowing things to come through. So it's without prejudice. So we're back to judgment. We don't want the judgment, but what we want, the reason we don't want that judgment is because we want somebody to be open to possibility.
Okay.
Open to the possibility that this is valuable. Right. I was saying about exposition and framing early on in a session. One of the things that I will say to people, particularly people that come into me through what I do with Rock's recovery, is I will say to them early on, I say, obviously, we're going to be having a conversation today. And I want you to be open to the possibility that it might not just be a conversation. There might be some other things that we're doing as well that seem different and odd and unusual and strange, right? And should we be doing these things, there's rationale behind them. And I would just invite you to be open to the possibility that you're going to get something interesting from this that you might not expect. So I sort of might do some framing that gets people into this realm of setting expectations such that they're not just going, we're just talking. We're going to be doing other stuff. And I make it clear that some of this stuff is weird and won't make sense. That's important, right? Because if everything has to make sense before they do it, my goodness me, we're going to have to do a lot of exposition, right?
Right.
But if you're going to get people to agree to do stuff that won't initially make sense, but will make sense later, they relax off that habitual checking. Does this make sense? Does this seem reasonable? Does this seem foolish? Does this seem like, this they can let go of all of that analysis behavior and go, okay, it's not supposed to make sense right now. We're just going to do it. And we've agreed to be open-minded about what's going to come through. That's a much more useful place to be in. So some of this stuff, it relates to how you frame things. If you're advertising yourself as a hypnotist or hypnotherapist, you probably don't have to do this because people expect to do something a bit weird and unusual. In fact, you have the opposite problem there, that it wasn't weird and unusual enough.
Right.
All right. So some people go, I don't think I was hypnotized because I could still hear what you were saying, or something like that. So, you framed as a hypnotist. Now you've got to make sure that what you do fits somebody's criteria for hypnosis. They go, yeah, I was hypnotized. If you're not framing yourself as a hypnotist, just as a coach or a change worker or something like that, then you have the opposite issue, which is framing it so that people will do unusual, strange things. They will move their mind in different ways without having to have certainty that it's worth doing before they do it. A complete rationale for doing it before they do it.
I'm curious if when you notice a client go psychoactive and you get some good change work going, especially if it's the caveat for this question, especially if it was a low exposition framing. So you haven't even explained anything about going psychoactive.
Yeah.
But now the client has, you've gotten some good work. What are some ways that you can help them get better at doing this in the future without explicit framing?
So Erickson does this all the time. Mm-hmm. This is stock in trade for Erickson.
Okay.
Now, there's a sense in which you could argue that Erickson views all change work as about learning. Mm-hmm. So he's never thinking, what's the problem that this client's got and what's the solution? He's just thinking, what is it this client needs to learn? Mm-hmm. So that's his first starting point. What is it the client needs to learn? The second point that he comes from is recognizing that whatever they need to learn, they already have some of it. Mm. Now, you can see this in examples of, there's a few case studies of Erickson teaching kids to learn to read who were illiterate, they didn't seem to be learning at school or whatever, or learn to write. And he'll do things like, he'll have the kid go through a newspaper and just like underline, like pick the first letter, and every time they see that, they underline that letter again. And he'll have them do this over and over again until he points out that you now know all the letters of the alphabet because you were able to recognize the patterns. Or he'll have somebody make a straight line, make a curved line, make two curves joined like this, do that, right? And then he'll say, these are all the shapes you need for all the letters of the alphabet. So he's always teaching, but he always teaches by using something that the client can already do or already has. So everything is being built up from existing resources always. Now, that's a very pragmatic example, teaching somebody to write or read or something like that. But he will do this in every area. Mm. And so he's always looking for, where does this client already know how to do this? And how can I use this to make more of it? So that's one way you can do this. Now, one of the things about Erickson's work is he's often implying. He's got this conscious-unconscious frame in there. So there's this idea that your unconscious mind is present and learning always. Now, this is relevant to what we're talking about here, because let's say I do a psychoactive process with somebody and I act as if I'm reprogramming them, mm-hmm. which is the kind of NLP frame a lot of the time. It's like, right, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to swish that away, and now your problem is gone. Now, what's implied in that is you need no consciousness here. I just did a thing to you. Mm-hmm. It's all going to be different now. There's no implication of learning. This is something, so Erickson said of Miller and Grinder, he called them bandit and swindler, that they took the shell but left the nut. So some of the nuts that they left was this importance around everything is learning and the unconscious mind is always paying attention and learning, not the unconscious mind is some dumb thing to get reprogrammed. Once you're doing this and you start recognizing that any process work you do involves a process of relating and paying attention in a variety of different ways. That in itself as a meta skill could be useful, right? So if you recognize this, you can bring this into the mix a lot of the time and suggest, and your unconscious mind is paying attention now and learning something about this, right? Or going back to that thing I suggested earlier where somebody says something and I say, okay, just slow down a moment. Just say that yourself again and notice what you notice in your body and your being as you say those words. What is it that you notice within yourself now as you say those words? And they go, oh, I kind of feel like really uncomfortable and tight, or I feel a heaviness on my shoulders. It's like, so you feel a heaviness on your shoulders, and these words create a heaviness on your shoulders, right? Now, did you know that? And if they say no, the implication is you now know something you didn't know before, right? So the implication of it, even though I haven't explicitly talked about learning, the implication is there's a learning going on here, right? Mm-hmm. So if you say now, did you know? They go, no. And you could then reply at that point and say, and I'm curious about what is everything else that you haven't been noticing yet that is going to be significant in taking you beyond where it is you've been, or something like that. So a suggestion sequence that orients attention and seeds the idea of learning, right? Mm-hmm. That is implicit. I've not directly said, right, well, your job here is to pay attention and recognize that as you're doing this, you're using your mind in certain ways. Now, these are skills. And the more you develop these skills, the better you'll be at creating change in your life and the more power you'll have with your own mind and your own psychology and your own experience.
Yeah.
So this is the thing. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because on the one hand, I'm saying you cannot make that stuff happen as a hypnotist or as a facilitator or anything like that. But what you can do is stack the odds. That's what you can do. So as a facilitator of hypnosis, of hypnotic experiences, or of mind shifts, or whatever you want to call it, everything I'm doing in terms of communication and being in the moment is things that I believe stack the odds for profound psychoactive experiences, or at least when I'm in that zone, right? And they probably do stack the odds. They don't force anything to happen. I have a friend of mine years ago who was going through a hard time. His father was terminally ill, and his father always wanted grandkids, and he didn't have any kids, and he felt like he was now under pressure to have kids, and everything just was not a good phase for this friend of mine. And he was suffering a lot. And because he's my friend, we used to go have coffee a couple of times a week. And afterwards, he'd often say, did you do something to me? Did you do some hypnosis stuff or NLP stuff? Because I just felt so much better. And I said, look, I didn't do anything to you, but I do want to help you. And I do have certain skills and sensibilities and habits. So, I'm not trying to do a change work session, but I am aware of helping him shift into a more resourceful place and using my communication in such a way around that. So often I will sometimes drop into moments and people say, oh, something weird happened. And what I want to say about that is that's probably because of habits and skills that I have. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that I have some mysterious power or anything like that. I just want to make that absolutely clear.
Right.
Because I don't. It's just about using communication sometimes in ways that tilt things towards certain likelihoods or certain happenings.
So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I loved the reminder that you can't force the client to go psychoactive, but you can stack the odds towards it. Sometimes it's about how we frame the work and how we help clients suspend the need for certainty long enough for something new to emerge. If you've got thoughts, questions, or ideas for future topics, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at changeworkingpod@gmail.com. See you next time.
Changeworking is produced by Ruckus Skye. For information on training, go to clientshifts.com.